The sun was sinking behind the Wyoming hills, painting the wide plains in shades of gold and sorrow. Jack Callahan wiped the sweat from his brow as he closed the last gate of the day. Life on the ranch had turned quiet since Lydia died. It had been 5 long years since that dreadful winter when her stagecoach went off the ridge. The sheriff never found her body, but the twisted wreckage and the torn fabric of her shawl had been enough to bury his hope. Jack became a ghost among the living, tending cattle, fixing fences, and watching the horizon for a woman he'd never see again. The nights were the hardest, the silence inside that old wooden house echoed louder than thunder. Sometimes he thought he heard her laughter carried by the wind, or caught her scent in the wildflowers near the creek. But he always reminded himself it was just memory and madness. That evening, as he headed back toward the barn, he noticed 2 small figures walking slowly down the dirt road. At first, he thought they were lost travelers from the nearby town. But as they came closer, he saw they were just children, little girls, no older than 6 or 7. Their clothes were dusty and worn, and their golden curls tangled from the wind. They looked like ghosts from another life, fragile but unafraid. Jack frowned and took off his hat, his voice deep but gentle. "You girls lost?" he asked. The taller one looked up at him, eyes the color of green glass, the same eyes that had once looked at him from across a kitchen table, the same eyes he'd never forgotten. Before he could speak again, the younger one took a trembling step forward and whispered, "Daddy." Jack's breath caught in his chest. The world tilted beneath his boots. For a moment, he thought he hadn't heard right. "What did you just call me?" he said, his voice low, uncertain. The little girl blinked up at him, tears glimmering in her lashes. "Mama said, if anything ever happened, we should find you." She hesitated, then added softly, "She said your name was Jack Callahan." Jack's pulse roared in his ears. He knelt down slowly, his rough hands shaking as he looked into their faces. The freckles, the curls, the eyes, it was like looking into 2 tiny mirrors of Lydia. "Where's your mama now?" he asked, his voice barely holding steady. The taller girl bit her lip, clutching her sister's hand. "She's hurt," she whispered. "She said to find you before it's too late." A rush of fear and hope slammed through Jack's chest. Lydia. Hurt? Alive? None of it made sense, but he didn't need it to. He stood up fast and looked toward the horizon. "Where is she?" The girls pointed toward the east ridge, where the hills turned dark under the setting sun. Without another word, Jack lifted both of them into his arms, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He ran to his horse, mounted, and took off toward the ridge, dust rising behind him like smoke. The girls held on tight as the wind whipped past them, and Jack's mind spun with memories, Lydia's smile, her voice, her promise that she'd always come back to him. Could it be true? Could she have survived? When they reached the edge of the canyon, Jack saw a faint trail of smoke in the distance. He followed it until he came to a small campfire beside an overturned wagon. There, lying weak and pale against the dirt, was a woman. Even from a distance, he knew that shape, that stillness. Lydia, the name broke out of him like a prayer. He leapt from his horse, his boots hitting the ground hard, and ran to her. Her face was thinner, older, marked by pain and years of struggle, but those eyes, those same green eyes, opened slowly and met his. "Jack," she breathed, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You found them." He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he touched her face, afraid she'd vanish like a dream. "You're alive," he whispered. "All this time. I thought I buried you." She gave a faint, trembling smile. "I wanted to come back. I tried. But they wouldn't let me." Jack frowned, confusion and anger mixing with disbelief. "Who wouldn't let you?" But she shook her head weakly. "Please, the girls first. Promise me you'll keep them safe." Her voice cracked, and she coughed, the sound hollow and sharp. Jack took her hand in his, gripping it as though his strength could keep her tethered to life. "You're safe now," he said fiercely. "You're home." The girls ran to her side, clutching her dress and crying. Lydia reached out, stroking their hair, whispering their names, Ella and Rose. Jack felt his throat tighten as he heard them for the first time. His daughters. His daughters. The realization hit him like lightning. All the years he'd spent alone, thinking his family was gone, and now here they were, living, breathing proof that love had survived the impossible. But before he could speak, Lydia's eyes fluttered. Jack, they'll come for them. Don't let them. Her voice faded as she slipped into unconsciousness. Jack's heart hammered in panic. Lydia. Stay with me. But her body went limp in his arms. The twins sobbed, clutching each other. Jack swallowed the rising terror and gathered Lydia into his arms, his jaw set. She's not dying again, he said, his voice fierce, determined. Not this time. He lifted her onto his horse, placing the girls beside her, and turned back toward the ranch. The night wind howled through the canyon, but Jack didn't hear it. He rode like a man possessed, driven by a fire that had long been dead inside him. He didn't know what had happened to Lydia, or who she meant by they. But one thing was certain, he'd fight the whole world if he had to. As the ranch lights came into view, Jack looked down at the woman he thought he'd lost forever and the daughters he'd never known existed. Hope, fear, and love twisted inside him like a storm. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer. Hold on, Lydia. I'm not letting you go again. The wind carried his words into the dark, across the plains, as if the land itself was listening. The first light of dawn crept over the Wyoming horizon as Jack Callahan sat beside the bed, his weathered hand wrapped gently around Lydia's. The room was silent except for the faint crackle of the fireplace and the quiet breaths of the two little girls asleep in the corner, their heads resting together. Jack hadn't slept all night. His mind replayed every second of the past 12 hours, her return, her collapse, the way she'd whispered, they'll come for them. Now she lay before him, fragile but alive. He still couldn't believe it. The woman he buried in his heart 5 years ago was breathing again, right here in his arms. But something in her face, those hollow cheeks, those eyes shadowed by fear, told him that whatever she'd been through was darker than he could imagine. When her eyes fluttered open, Jack felt his heart jump. Hey there, he whispered softly, voice trembling with relief. You're safe now. Lydia blinked, her gaze roaming the room, landing on the twins, then on him. Tears welled in her eyes. You kept them safe, she said faintly. You always were my strength, Jack. He squeezed her hand. Lydia, what happened to you? They said you died. I saw the wreck. I saw your shawl in the snow. She looked away, her lips trembling. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a shaky breath, she began. The stagecoach did crash that night, she said, her voice thin, trembling. But I wasn't on it when it went down. I had stepped out during the stop to help a woman with her baby when the horses bolted. By the time I realized what happened, the coach was gone, tumbling off the ridge. Everyone thought I was in it. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried to get back to you, Jack. I did. But, she hesitated, her hand tightening in his. There were men there. They worked for a rancher named Silas Dodd. He said he owned the land your ranch sat on, that everything you had was built on his claim. When I told him he was wrong, that we'd bought it fair, he laughed. He said I'd pay for my husband's mistake. Jack's jaw clenched, fury rising in his chest. Dodd. I remember that name, he said through gritted teeth. He tried to buy me out a month before that winter. I told him no. Lydia nodded weakly. He wanted the land for the river running through it. I didn't understand why until later. It's the water rights, Jack. He wanted full control, and you stood in his way. Her voice trembled harder. So, he took me. His men kept me hidden in one of his outposts in the northern hills. For months, I was trapped there. By the time I escaped, I was carrying them, our daughters. Jack's eyes widened, his heart pounding. You were pregnant when they said you died. Lydia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't know then. I only realized after I'd been gone for weeks. I tried to find my way back, but Dodd's men were everywhere. They didn't want me alive, not if I could prove what they'd done. I gave birth in hiding, in a cabin by the river. A kind woman, a widow, helped me raise them until last winter. But when Dodd found out I was alive, he sent his men again. That's when I ran. I told Ella and Rose to find you if I didn't make it. Jack's hands trembled. Every word she spoke burned through him like fire, pain, guilt, rage, and love all tangled together. You should have told me, he said softly, his voice breaking. You should have found a way. Lydia's eyes searched his. I wanted to, Jack. God knows I did. But I couldn't risk leading them to you. If Dodd knew you were alive and had the girls, he would have come for all of you. I couldn't let that happen. She started to cry harder, her voice cracking. I watched from the hills, Jack. I saw you at the cemetery, standing over a grave with my name on it. I wanted to run to you. But I couldn't. Jack's throat tightened until it hurt to breathe. He reached for her, pulling her gently into his arms. You did what you had to do, he whispered. You kept them safe. You kept our family alive. That's what matters. She clung to him, shaking, as years of pain and fear spilled out in sobs. He held her tighter, swearing silently that no one would ever hurt her or their daughters again. Outside, a sharp knock broke the silence. Jack stiffened. He looked toward the door, his instincts flaring. No one came to his ranch this early unless they had reason. He carefully laid Lydia back against the pillow and walked to the window. A black wagon stood at the edge of the property. 2 men in dusters and wide hats waited by the gate. One of them called out, "Mornin', Callahan. Word is you got some visitors last night." Jack's heart dropped. Lydia's face went pale. It's them, she whispered. Dodd's men. Jack turned, his face hard as stone. Stay with the girls, he said, grabbing his rifle from the wall. His hands were steady now, steady like they hadn't been in years. He stepped out onto the porch, the cold morning air biting his skin. You boys lost, he called out. The taller one grinned. No, sir. We're right where we need to be. See, our boss says you've got something that don't belong to you. Jack's jaw tightened. The only thing I've got here is my family, and you'd best be turning around before you find trouble you don't want. The man's grin faded. We can do this easy, Callahan. Or hard. Your choice. Jack lifted the rifle, the barrel gleaming in the sunrise. You step 1 inch closer to my land, and I swear to God, it'll be the last step you take. The 2 men hesitated, eyes narrowing. For a tense moment, the only sound was the wind. Then, slowly, they turned and climbed back into the wagon. Tell Dodd, Jack said, his voice like thunder, if he wants a fight, he knows where to find me, but he'd better bring an army. When the wagon finally disappeared into the distance, Jack lowered his gun and turned back toward the house. Lydia stood at the doorway, the twins clinging to her skirt. For the first time in years, their family was whole, but danger was still coming. Jack walked up to her, cupping her face with a fierce tenderness. We've lost too much already, he said quietly. This time, we fight back. Lydia nodded through her tears. Together. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Together. The morning sun broke through the clouds then, casting golden light over the Callahan ranch. It felt like a promise, fragile but bright. A new beginning. A new fight.